Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Sweatable podcast. My name is Brooks Herbis, and I'm an online fitness, nutrition, and mindset coach who's here to help you simplify and make sense out of the all too confusing fitness and nutrition industry. Let's be real, there's a lot of conflicting information online, and it can be hard to know what's legit and who to trust. In every episode, I'll be sharing the science and psychology behind health, fitness, and long-lasting behavior change. But I'll also be sharing real-life practical application because all of the best info in the world only matters if you can actually apply it to your real life. So grab a coffee, water, glass of wine, or lace up your walking shoes, and let's dive in. Hello, you guys. Welcome back to the Sweat Simple podcast. And today we are talking all about stress. And I would bet that many of you listening to this podcast feel some sort of stress in your life, if not feel high stress in your life. And I would bet that because I know who my audience is. A lot of you guys are high performing women. You balance a lot of different plates. You have a lot of responsibilities. And on top of that, you want to maximize all of these areas of your life. You want to crush your health and fitness goals. You want to excel at your job. You want to be a great parent. You want to be a great partner. You want to maximize every single area of your life, which can lead to feelings of stress and overwhelm. And I want to caveat this episode by saying that I get it. I have been there, right there with you. I am not so much anymore, but I would say naturally my tendency is to be more high stress. But in recent years, I've really done a lot of work to manage my stress. And some of that we're going to be talking about today. But I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to be constantly stressed. I know what it feels like to be constantly overwhelmed. There was a period in my life where I was working a very demanding full-time job while also building up my health and fitness business. And I essentially had no social life, no free time, and I was just go, go, go. So I know what that feeling is like and especially now when there is all this talk about cortisol, and stress is made out to be such a negative thing that it can feel even more stressful because you're stressed in general, and then you hear all this negative talk about cortisol and how it's impacting fat loss and X, Y, and Z, and then you're more stressed about that, and it's just this ongoing cycle. So I wanted to take a different approach today and talk about actually some of the positive sides of stress, because guess what? They do exist. But I do want to be clear, stress does impact our health and our fat loss goals. And if you're not sure how, if you don't know what those reasons are or how that, is true, I actually have an entire podcast episode dedicated to that. So it's titled Why You Have No Self-Control When You're Stressed. So spoiler alert, stress impacts your self-control. It's episode number 106 when you're searching for it. I'm going to link it in the show notes for you as well. But if you are someone who is highly stressed and you haven't listened to this episode, I do recommend listening to it because it is important to understand ultimately how stress is impacting your fat loss goals. And I also do share some really actionable tips in there in order to have this not be such an issue moving forward. So stress impacts fat loss, and it can also impact our overall health with things like raised blood pressure. So it's stress isn't this always painted out to be this amazing thing. It's typically painted out in such a negative light. But the truth is that stress isn't always very negative. And like I talked about earlier, it is so trendy right now to bash on cortisol. But the truth is that we need cortisol to survive. We need it. So we don't need to be on these supplement protocols and completely getting rid of all of our cortisol and worried about cortisol face. We need cortisol to survive. And one of the biggest factors actually that determines how stress impacts our body and how stress impacts our fat loss goals is how we're viewing stress, which is why I wanted to create this podcast episode, because many of us right now have this negative connotation around stress. Are we only seeing it as a negative and this horrible thing that we need to get rid of, and any amount of stress is bad? Or are we recognizing that stress has a purpose and it can actually be our body's way of setting us up for new challenges? So when you start to get stressed, are you viewing it from the framework of, okay, I'm stressed, but like I got this, no big deal? Or when you're getting stressed, you tend to go into that, I'm so stressed. I'm so overwhelmed. Everything's falling apart. I hate this feeling. This is so uncomfortable. I need to get rid of this feelings. Like, which one of those are you leaning towards? Because if it's the second, hopefully over the course of this podcast episode, we can start to flip that and we can start to flip some of those negative feelings, because some studies have shown that people who are viewing stress as that first reaction, so you're viewing stress as enhancing, something that is helpful, like you view stress as this kind of positive thing. Some studies have shown that they actually have a more adaptive cortisol response, which is pretty cool and pretty wild. So what that basically means is a more adaptive cortisol response. So everyone's cortisol response is a little bit different. So people and individuals who have high cortisol reactivity to stress, when you have that stress enhancing mindset of, oh, okay, my body's preparing me for a challenge. Like, I've got this. Like, this stress, like, can actually mean really exciting things. If you're someone who has high cortisol in relation to stress, but you have that positive view around it, your cortisol actually lowers in response. So it's adaptive, meaning it's moving towards more of that midline. So the flip side is also true. People who have lower cortisol responses, like they're just really like don't have much of, their cortisol doesn't really react much to those stress feelings. Their cortisol levels actually raise when they have this stress enhancing mindset, when they have this more positive mindset around stress. And that's a good thing. It might not seem like it because you're like, don't we always want low cortisol levels? But no, we don't. It's a good thing because remember, stress is usually preparing our body for a challenge. So if you're someone who has lower cortisol responses, it can actually be a good thing if your cortisol levels raise and actually prepare you, like get you a little bit more pumped up for this challenge. So basically, when we have this positive mindset around stress, or when we view stress as a positive thing, something that can enhance our life, enhance our experience, our cortisol levels move closer to this midline. They move closer to really where they need to be in order to either like properly prepare our body for a challenge or not work ourselves up so much that we're getting into that really like anxious, overwhelmed state. So what's also really cool about this is knowing that a stress enhancing mindset leads to more adaptive cortisol levels, is that we have the power, we have the capability to change our mindset around stress. So if you're someone who right now is in that mindset of, oh my God, I hate this feeling, I hate stress, I need to just like completely get rid of it, what we want to do is start to move into the direction of having more of that stress enhancing mindset, because that is going to allow you to have better adaptive cortisol responses. So we are in control here. Like we can see stress as more enhancing. So not always seeing stress as like a negative or feeling like we really want to feel like we are still in control of situations when we're stressed. So how do we do this? How do we get from this place of, like I shared, I used to be in that place of, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, this is a terrible feeling, I don't know how to do this. How do we get from that place to this view that, okay, stress is preparing my body for a challenge. Oh, stress is getting me like pumped up. Like stress is helping me handle what this big challenge is that might be coming. Like how do we start to see stress as a more positive? We really need to reframe. So recognize, instead of immediately panicking when we start to get those feelings of stress, of anxiety, maybe even of panic. And I do want to, of course, now that I'm mentioning stress and anxiety, I want to clarify that though I have a certification in health mindset and behavior change, I am not a licensed therapist. And if you are struggling with something like true anxiety, true panic, I do recommend talking to some sort of mental health professional. So this is more just like a fun educational podcast. if you're really struggling with these things, definitely want to recommend talking to a mental health professional. I'm always a huge advocate for therapy. I've been in therapy for years now myself, so highly recommend it. But going back to that, so how do we go from this debilitating feeling around stress to viewing it as more positive? We want to recognize that those physical signs in our body, so some of that uncomfortable feeling that we're feeling is actually our body preparing us for a challenge, which can be a good thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. So how can we reframe from, "Oh, I hate this feeling," to, "Cool, my body's doing what it's supposed to do. It's preparing itself for a challenge." So really continue to reframe when those maybe uncomfortable feelings pop up. We also can focus on getting better at responding to stress. So the more that we can respond to stress in more of a neutral or positive way, the more that pattern is going to get ingrained in our patterns overall. So instead of having that everything goes downhill when we're stressed, everything hits the fan, we give up on our goals, we stop all of our healthy habits, we don't have to take that approach. And the more that you can prove to yourself that things don't have to go downhill when you're stressed, not everything has to be ruined, we can continue moving forward, the easier that's going to feel. So it's really about putting in those reps and starting to get that repetition in. So instead of immediately going towards everything goes downhill, everything is negative when I'm stressed, starting to get into the practice of staying the course, keeping with your healthy habits, viewing stress as a positive, the easier that's going to become the more we do it. Now, this does directly relate to your fat loss journey, because if you are constantly viewing stress as my fitness goals fall apart, that trend is going to continue. So what you really need to do is, instead of viewing stress negative, my fitness goals fall apart, you need to start to feel confident and comfortable in the fact that that doesn't have to be the case. And the more you can practice that, the more you can practice staying the course even when you're stressed, the more that that is going to become the pattern. So rather than falling back on your old habits, maybe leaning in towards short-term comforts like fast food or sitting on the couch and watching Netflix, you start to prove to yourself that that doesn't have to be your stress reaction. Your stress reaction can actually be these new habits that lead to longer term stress management and feeling good overall. And that actually brings us perfectly into what I wanted to talk about next, which is just some bare minimum stress management techniques. So if you are someone who is experiencing a lot of stress, things that can just help, and again, this is like very unique. You do need to really find what works for you, but some things that can help is movement. So even just going for a short walk can be a great stress management technique. How you're fueling your body. So instead of turning towards those short-term comforts like the chocolate and the fast food, nourishing your body for more of these long-term goals, because it's actually been shown that the longer-term fulfillment things like sticking to your health and fitness goals is actually much better for overall stress management than those instant soothes like the chocolate. Recovery is also very important when it comes to stress management technique, because exercise is physical stress on our bodies, so we need to make sure that we're recovering in between training sessions, we're getting adequate sleep, all the things that are going to help our body physically recover from the physical stress of exercise, and even being in a calorie deficit is stress on our body. So we need to make sure that we're taking recovery from that as well. And then, of course, I feel like you guys probably all know the standard breathing exercises, getting plenty of sleep, all that good stuff can also help to, kind of keep stress in a more manageable spot. So while we can't ignore stress and the impact that it has on our health and, fat loss, we can shift our mindset around it. We don't have to continue to view stress as this negative thing, because as you saw or listened to throughout this whole podcast, stress can have positive impacts whether that be the physical stress that comes from building muscle, the physical stress of being in a calorie deficit that leads to the fat loss goal you're trying to hit, whether it be your body properly preparing you to navigate a challenge in your life. Those are all stressful things. Those are all causing stress in your body, but those are all also positive things. So we don't want to only view stress as a negative. We need to also recognize that stress can be positive. And remember that how you're viewing stress and your mindset around stress is ultimately going to change how your body responds to stress moving forward. So the more that we can develop this mindset around stress is enhancing and stress is a positive, the less impact it's going to have on your health and fitness journey moving forward. Now, if you are still listening, I do have a favor to ask all of you. If my podcast has helped you at all, it would seriously mean the world to me if you could leave a review, whether you're in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you are, because full disclosure, I am really trying to grow this podcast this year because I really want to be able to help more people, and reviews are a big way to grow your podcast. So every month moving forward, I'm going to be picking one person who leaves a review to win a power hour with me. And a power hour is 60 minutes with me to chat all about your health and fitness goals, struggles, truly anything you want. Treat it as like a nutrition, workout, and lifestyle audit. We will be going deep for 60 minutes to help you really identify what's been working well for you and why you're struggling and what we could change moving forward so you start making more progress to your goals. So along with this power hour, you always get 2 weeks of email access with me, which is typically something only reserved for my one-on-one coaching clients. So if this sounds like something that you would be interested in, I'm picking one winner a week, and I would really, really appreciate it if you guys could leave a review to help this podcast grow. Now, if you have any other questions about stress, the positives, the negatives, please shoot me a DM. I always want to chat through it with you guys further, but just in general, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you all next week.